Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome again to another episode on Talk Architecture Podcast. And we are doing also simultaneously on YouTube. And this is a presentation that I did with the AIA International Symposium done recently on the topic of sensory driven architecture. And the complete title is There is a Proposition, and the proposition is that I am giving the opinion that the use of principles and ideas in sensory driven architecture will form inclusive and therapeutic spaces. So, at first, we want to come into this point where we need to define how did I get this proposition. Is a long-standing, soul-searching, a lot of research that I had done ever since I started architecture, and especially when I was in academia. We have at one point the idea of therapeutic spaces. So I try to define this in terms of mental health. So a therapeutic relationship is a professional connection between a therapist and a client built on trust, mutual respect, empathy, and a shared goal of positive change. It provides a safe, non judgmental space where clients can openly share their feelings and concerns, and therapists use their expertise to help clients overcome challenges and improve their well being. This is an AI generated quotation. So, in that, you can see that therapeutic spaces have the word trust and secure and empathy and respect in it. So, how do we depict in architecture this kind of space? So, another definition I've taken from Satoshi Kosei in 2000, the principles of barrier-free to illustrate inclusive spaces, which are safety, usability, and accessibility. So this is kind of important that we set this idea of sensory-driven architecture needing to be doing this in order for you to have the inclusive and therapeutic space. So we first set the goal and now we're going to aim for it. So that is what I'm trying to do here. When we got back to the proposition earlier, what are those principles in sensory driven architecture? And I'm going to fast forward to the idea that behind this is the lens of disability. And disability, which is designing for people with disabilities, benefits everyone by improving overall usability and convenience, fostering innovation, expanding market reach, and creating a more inclusive and equitable society. So, with that in mind, because I'm coming from being an activist for a long time, since 1998, this has colored my architecture perception. And of course, before 1998, I started architecture way back as a student, and I had the sense of loving historic buildings. Now that's what I did for my PhD. But going back into what this definition of disability is, we know from, for example, an example is the Australians illustrating a lot of types of disabilities. And we're more common with the physical disability and the sensory disability. And I will talk about that in due time. Yes. When we talk about disability nowadays, we talk about universal design. So in the 1994, the late Ron Mace led his team, which is often referred to the father of universal design, and came up with the universal design principles. So I'd like to talk about universal design principles, but I want to give an idea about why we need to integrate accessibility goals into architecture to ensure equitable access. So you could imagine a situation where a blind person, or you can do a blind simulation, and you're working at your desk in an office on the 36th floor of a high-rise building. What happens in an emergency situation and what will help you to escape out of the building? So accessibility goals and the barrier-free principles I mentioned to you just now, we can also look at the use of design principles. So for a blind person, there need to be a perceptible information for that blind person to find where the exit is, where the fire escape lobby is, and the set of stairs to exit the building as soon as possible. So that is one of the things that you need to do and to consider for universal design. Another thing is for a wheelchair user to be able to access. Perhaps that wheelchair user is going along in the corridor and there is a lovely garden, but could not get access to it. So therefore, there is no size and space for approach and use to access into the garden. Never mind equitable use or flexibility in use. There's just simply no access to the garden. So if that's an access, maybe it's difficult access, that they're unable to use it because it's too steep. So we like to look into, because I am from an architectural background, I would like to look into this idea of architecture sense and sensibilities. And we have some good examples, really. And I find that the amphitheater or the enabling village in Singapore, at Red Hill, Singapore, is a very interesting design of adaptive reuse, but they try to do a lot of access goals and universal design principles, bringing in families, children, elderly person, and mothers when nursing and also expectant to be able to use the space. So we find that in having the architect owning the process, and in this case, they needed to do this because enabling village is a place like a vocational study area for persons with disabilities to learn new skills in information technology and digital technology. So they needed to make it accessible, but we're looking at also at building types that are that everyone use or is targeted mostly for everyone. So it's not so about specialized design, but it's more so for getting everyone in. I just want to note the Robson Square Stramp compared to the amphitheater, which amphitheater has safety, usability, and accessibility, and other universal design principles, allowing people to feel good using it. But at Robson Square, we have the Stramp, which is quote unquote has safety issues and is horrendously dangerous. So this is the issue when there's a trend and the embrace to take in universal design as part of your design practice approach will need to be much more sensitive to what is needed for persons with disabilities. So I'd like to go into when we visited Koshan Theater New Wing in Hong Kong by Ronald Liu and partners, we find that as a wheelchair user, especially, I find that I could do anything, everything. I could be the actor. I have a dressing room that is accessible. I can go via the ramps. I can, if I'm an audience member, I can easily sit in with the rest, without having to be, in an awkward sitting area. And what I can't do is actually manage the lighting and the sound system, because that's the only thing that is not accessible for a wheelchair user. But all in all, is almost there. 99% is spot on. And the whole idea of this lecture is actually to look at the three different things: architecture, disability, and phenomenology. And I would like to reason out that if you want to do sensory driven architecture, you have to look at some works or some ideas and thoughts from people like Juhani, Pallasmaa, Peter Zumthor. And I'm giving an example of someone I know whom I work closely with as well. So I'm trying to, figure out a set of principles is beyond, shall we say, universal design. What is it that is beyond this compliance and top down approach to get architects to own the process in universal design, but they feel comfortable with it. It doesn't look like a hospital design when they use, if they use, they can innovate on the materials that you use, like the stainless steel railing, which is commonly used. They could innovate on that and make it much more, to their liking and taste. So there's also the idea of multisensorial experience, which we need to discuss. Um, that is good. Yes, this is a thing that I would like to talk about when we talk about architecture. Yes, the person whom I have been working with for 8 years in the design thesis studio, and also the second year, is Kevin Matlow, who is someone that talks about form and content a lot. I mean, form in the sense that we are fascinated by form and we're not looking at content. So more pro content. And it's not only just content, it's context, specificities of context. So Lowe mentioned, there's a quote that says design is a conversation between creativity and context in his book, Small Projects in 2010. So, what is the architectural criticism implied in this statement? So, I'm giving a hint to you that it's about relationships. So, Lowe is talking about a deeper complexity of a problem, and we need to understand that there is a weave of relationships in the context. This makes for a heightened intuition and informed decision when you know about the knowledge, you have the knowledge of this contextual weave. So it is an important factor when, if you want the problem solved, like the space, which is a void, what material to choose, what plans to put in, how are you going to do the order and proportion, it's important to actually understand this contextual weave. And it could be any issue that you can find in this world. For example, if you want to clean a gun, if you want, it doesn't have to be architectural that you know it, or if you want to clean the windows of a high-rise building, if you want to talk about economy of a country, you will need to understand the context and what are the relationships that is there. So the complexity around the context. And when we deal with building, we're doing with contextual issues of that particular building. So it's not just a generalization, it is very specific. And so here you get a conversation going on because you are knowledge seeking. You are trying to ask questions about the problem you want to solve. So this is the creativity in finding out what the connection is and what the relationship is. So, this conversation is very important. So, in relationships between different things, you find out more when you're having a conversation with somebody working, cleaning the window on a high-rise building, or somebody know how to work the gun, like I said just now. But we're going back to architecture. Somebody working on a project, the contractor, or the people around the area, or the user of that particular space. Then you can create creativity, and that conversation between creativity, that you're trying to solve the problem with the context. So definitely here we have the idea of an approach to architecture in which we deal with the context as a priority than other things. So form making is after that. So I mentioned about disability as something that is important in this day and age, and that universal design is being accepted more by digital technology than architects. It's slower with the architects because of, shall we say, there's too many roles. There's a contractor, developer, the client. So everybody needs to get on board with it. So I've talked about the architect owning the process, owning universal design principles, and innovating on it. Excuse me. And in Singapore, they have this UD Excellence Award. So this one, yeah, yeah. So there's a picture here where you see an escalator. I'm taking a photo from above at level 1 and looking at ground level, and you can see the guardrail around the bottom of the escalator to protect people from hitting their heads. Like for people who can't see, they might hit their head on the escalator. And then there's contrast where there's a line zigzagging, not zigzagging, sorry. There's a line that is taking you to the drop-off point and over here, and that is part of the pattern of the floor, which is lighter gray, and the rest is darker gray, which is color contrast for those who have vision impairment and have partial sighted. They can discern this line. Of course, the light at the end there with the bright light in the external area next to the drop-off point would be something that will pull you to that area if you have partial sightedness. And then you have the set of bollards so that cars don't come in, and yet you can go without having to negotiate the curb. And so this is Tan Tock Seng Hospital lobby, and it won a Universal Design Excellence Award recently in Singapore. So the architect tried to go beyond just, shall we say, accessibility compliance, and to touch on universal design. But this is a hospital, but the point is, it feels less of a hospital when you go to this building, and that they have broke down some barriers in terms of designing a hospital. And when we think about disability, we think about a lot of the different types of disability, and this is the UK definition, where we have the behavioral or emotional, the sensory impaired disorders, the physical disability, and developmental disability. And this definition is always enshrined in conventions, the Conventional Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and in the legislation. And when we're talking about Universal Design Excellence Award, we're talking about having to the government to take charge, or the government to implement or show the way for architects and developers and building owners how to do it. So therefore, my talk here, this lecture, is more about the architects themselves initiating universal design. And what I'm saying is that why is there less of the uptake of doing it? Why is it digital tech is doing it more and faster than architecture? Is because perhaps architects feel that it is too much of a force, and naturally they want to explore or experiment with architecture. So I recommend that the sensory driven principles that we're going to listen to later. So when we talk about sensory driven, we look into in architectural theory. One of the theories or schools of thoughts is phenomenology. It's good that we talk about hospitals now that we come to this quote by Juhani Pallasmaa in 2016, the Bengal Architecture Symposium, where he mentioned doctors and architects have the same task, which is to improve the human condition. There you go. One is more of scientific, quantitative, looking at a problem from scientific knowledge and repairing that or giving the solution to the problem, where architects more qualitative, more to do with poetics, more to do with art. Yes, of course, science helped to solve the problem, but it's both to improve the human condition. So this is an interesting AI generated image on the right that was quoted in an article by The Guardian, in which we're asking questions about what's happening to the architectural practice, the profession, and architectural education. We observe that what is happening in architecture is form making without content or substantial thought to making spaces touch a human is becoming more apparent in speculative design in public and commercial buildings. So, the Guardian article, Neil Leach, author of The Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, said, the problem with architects is that we almost entirely focus on images, but the most revolutionary change is in the less sexy area, the automation of the entire design package from developing initial options right through to construction. In terms of strategic thinking and real-time analysis, AI is already way beyond what human architects are capable of. This could be the final nail in the coffin of a struggling profession. So, what is it? What else can we do to save the architectural profession? We have got to go back to the fact that architecture straddle between the science and the arts, and we're leaving the arts behind. The poetics that people like Juhani Pallasmaa mentioned, and many architects are doing projects that make us think and being critical about. So we need to redefine multisensorial experience, and I did show here in the two definitions. One is a multisensorial experience engages multiple human senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, simultaneously to create a more profound, immersive, and memorable interaction with a product, environment, or event. By combining different sensory inputs, it stimulates the brain more broadly, leading to richer learning, stronger emotional connections, and enhanced engagement. This is an AI generated description. But the quote from Pallasmaa shows more to do with architecture. Because Pallasmaa, as an architect and a writer and someone who has a lot of videos on YouTube, because he talks a lot and in different places, you can have a listen to. So what he says here I'm comparing this to is that he says every significant experience of architecture is multisensory. Qualities of matter, space, and scale are measured by the eye, ear, nose, skin, tongue, skeleton, and muscle. That's so precise because we see the word matter as in materiality, space, and scale. So we know that we have spaces that are very profound. And I'd like to take you here to Louis Kahn's Salk Institute, La Jolla, California. There's a photo of the court, well, it's a forecourt, or, well, it's not really a court yet, but it's this external space with a pool that goes to right into infinity, towards the ocean. La Jolla is next to the ocean and the sky, and the buildings. The research center is on the right and the left, cascading with this whole idea of a vista. So let me talk about this particular space from my perspective. My most cherished childhood memories is this one. And from the mental health perspective, I would say that certain cherished memories could help you heal and could help you be in touch with yourself if you're kind of lost. And this particular one, it was in 1973. And I was 11 years old, and my father took us to the Salk Institute. I had polio at the age of 3. And could it be the reason why my father took me there? I was in that space and I felt a sense of profoundness and immense joy. I did not know that I was to study and train to be an architect. Kahn is one of my favorite architects, but that was the only building of his that I visited. So this is a memory of a place, a feelings of a particular place. Like I said, mental health and well-being is helpful to be able to replicate feelings and emotions that you had in the past and feel it in the present. Celebrating the void and not just the form in this building. So the multisensorial experience that is captured, the feeling is uplifting and the sense of vision is enlarged and expanded, and I could see the sense of scale to be eternity or infinite, of course. Auditory senses of the trickling of the water and the sense of the smell of the sea. It is really multisensorial and it encapsulates every single thing: smell, vision, hearing, sense of scale, spatial sense, and even tactile, hence a memorable space. So I don't know whether Kahn intended that, but I feel that he did. And it is a special space where it is a research center. It's a mundane research center. It's not like intentional in a way. He didn't have to do it this way. So we see that, we respect that. I will finish here before I go to sensory architecture. This is part 1 of the discussion, the talk that I did. And I hope that you had an enjoyable time listening to this talk, simultaneously done on YouTube and also as a podcast in audio. Thank you very much for listening to part 1. We will continue part 2 soon.